So now, ladies and gentlemen, live and in colour, it's Mr. Wayne Lovejuice.
The other day I produced a Louis, had a chat with an interesting chappie who said that the YouTube algorithms really aren't that happy. If a channel only broadcasts once a week, so we decided we could text ya whenever we've got a piece of news in our new book on the track extra. Well, ladies and gentlemen, whenever my old friend Richard Freeman comes up to the CFZ to do stuff, we always end up doing book reviews for On the Track Extra. And this, today, is no exception. So, Richard, what have we got to talk about this week?
We have got Wendigo Lore, Monsters, Myths and Madness by Chad Lewis and Kevin Lee Nelson. Kevin Lee Nelson wrote a very good book on the Missouri Monster, and Chad Lewis is one of my favourite writers and researchers. Whenever he's on a podcast, I never miss it. If the name Chad Lewis is attached to something, it's a kite mark for quality.
So, tell me about the book.
It's the first popular in-depth look at the Wendigo. Other books have had chapters on the Wendigo, and there's been academic, very hard to get hold of academic texts on the Wendigo. But this is the first mass market book about the Wendigo, and the Wendigo is a creature from Algonquin folklore in the northern United States and Canada, and it's a cannibal spirit, basically an avatar of winter and hunger. It's this towering skeletal giant that eats human flesh and is forever hungry, but it can also possess people, and the stories go that if you ever eat human flesh you will become possessed by the Wendigo. And back in the day that was a very real horror that could happen under certain circumstances. You might be forced to eat human flesh, and it was a big social taboo, so it was believed you would become a Wendigo, and you would start to take on the characteristics of the Wendigo, and you would start to feed on other human beings, firstly your own family and then other members of the tribe. So suspected Wendigos were put to death. Now this book is absolutely fascinating because it goes into detail about alleged cases of Wendigo possession, like the Cree hunter Swift Runner, who confessed to having killed and eaten his entire family and was hung, and he actually said he is the lowest of all men. He confessed himself, and there's photographs of him with these dead haunted eyes in it. And there's another chapter on a guy called Jack Fiddler, who was a Wendigo hunter who went out and tracked down Wendigos. If anybody was thought to be turning Wendigo, that was the terminology for when you're becoming a Wendigo, he would put them to death. And the way to kill a Wendigo was to burn its heart. The only way to be sure of destroying a Wendigo was to burn its heart. So you could strangle them or chop their heads off or kill them another way, but you had to hack the heart out and burn it. And he killed a number of Wendigos, this guy called Jack Fiddler. But it also looks at alleged sightings of the creature itself, and there have been sightings of this thing totally distinct from Bigfoot, this great pallid skeletal creature. And it's a real fear for the Algonquin people. They don't even like mentioning the name of it because they think it brings bad luck. And when Chad was doing one of his talks, they asked him not to mention the creature by name because that's how rattled they get by it. And it also looks at the Wendigo in media and how the popular modern image of it is quite wrong. It's often given at the head of a deer or the antlers of a deer these days, or a head like a deer's skull with the antlers. And this comes from a really awful film called The Wendigo about 20 years ago, which was really dreadful. But there's no actual Indian images of the creature that give it horns. It's a huge skeletal humanoid, sometimes with this mane of flowing white hair on its head. But the first instance of the Wendigo being given these horns is in an illustration by a guy called Matt Fox for the famous Algernon Blackwood story, The Wendigo, which was sort of co-opted a little bit by H.P. Lovecraft into his mythos. And it was in, I believe, in Weird Tales, and he has this great striding figure that looks half man, half beast with these antlers on its head. And that was the first instance that the Wendigo was ever given antlers. And it doesn't really have antlers in actual legend or in the sightings either. It's just a popular misconception, like putting wings on fairies, which was first done by the Victorians and then carried on in the god-awful films of Walt Disney. So the Wendigo doesn't have horns. But this is a great book, and if you want to know anything about the Wendigo, read this book. I was planning to write a book on the Wendigo myself, and I got hold of some academic texts that I wasn't allowed to take out of the library, even though I'd paid for them to be sent down from London, and I was told I wasn't allowed to photocopy them as well, so I just went and photocopied them in front of the librarian, sort of daring her to bloody say anything after I had paid that much to get hold of the text, and then she wouldn't let me take it away. And I was going to write a book, and I've still got all these notes for it, but these guys beat me to it, and it's a fantastic book. It really is. So if you're at all interested in Native American folklore or cannibal monsters of the North Woods, this is the book for you.
When did the Wendigo incidents stop happening?
They didn't.
They're happening still today?
Yes. There was a guy on a Greyhound bus, and he wasn't Native American, he was Chinese, although they say that they share the same ancestry, who hacked the head off the guy in front of him and started to eat his head. And people likened it to Wendigo possession. But people still report seeing the Wendigo today. And the fear of it is very much still alive today, whether the thing itself exists or not.
I didn't know that. It's a much more complicated subject than I'd imagined.
Well, it's an absolutely great book.
Well, I don't think you can say better than that. Richard thinks it's an absolutely great book. It's on my list of books that I want to read. And that's it for this episode. I'll be back on Saturday. And until then, be seeing you.